The restaurant fell completely silent the moment I placed the thick folder on the table beside my mother's wine glass. It wasn't just another family dinner. It was the first time in 22 years that every member of my family had been gathered in one room with me. No one spoke. Forks stopped moving. Even the waiters seemed to sense something was about to happen. Just seconds earlier, my mother had been telling everyone how I had abandoned the family years ago, how I had manipulated my grandmother into leaving me everything, how I had refused to help my own twin sister during her hardest time. Around the table, I could feel dozens of eyes fixed on me. My father sat with his usual stone face, chewing slowly as if nothing unusual was happening. My aunt wore that smug smile she perfected over the years. At the far end of the table sat my twin sister, Whitney. She looked exhausted. Older than 34. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. I rested my hand on the folder, but didn't open it. Not yet. Because once those papers came out, nothing in this family would ever be the same again. And the truth inside that folder is exactly why my parents have never spoken to me since. But to understand how we reached that dinner, you have to go back 22 years. Back to the night my parents decided they only needed one daughter. My name is Charlotte. I'm a large animal veterinarian in a tiny farming town in Wisconsin. Most mornings begin before sunrise. Sometimes they begin at 2 or 3 in the morning when a farmer calls because a cow is struggling to give birth. I've spent countless nights knee-deep in mud, blood, and freezing rain trying to save animals that can't tell me what's wrong. People often ask if that kind of work makes me fearless. It doesn't. Blood never frightened me. Broken bones don't scare me. Even death is something I've learned to face. What scares me are people who can smile warmly while destroying someone they claim to love. My husband, Sam, is a welder. Together we lease 40 acres of farmland where our children spend every free minute chasing chickens, climbing fences, and pretending every stray dog belongs to them. Our daughter Mia is 7 years old. She asks questions about absolutely everything. Our son Eli is 4. He believes every animal in the world is secretly waiting to become his best friend. We're not wealthy. We've never lived in a fancy house. But we built every piece of our life ourselves. Every mortgage payment, every tractor repair, every school expense, every success, brick by brick, without asking my parents for a single dollar. Not once. For years, I believed I'd finally made peace with the past. Then one cold Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I had just finished treating a dairy cow and was washing disinfectant from my hands inside the clinic when my phone started ringing. The number wasn't familiar. It came from Iowa. Normally, I ignore unknown calls, especially ones from out of state. Something made me answer anyway. There was silence. Just breathing. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in more than 2 decades. Charlotte. A pause. Honey, it's Mom. I froze. Not because I'd missed her. Because my mother never called me honey. In fact, she hadn't called me anything for 22 years. I slowly placed the towel on the counter. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Whatever she wanted. It wasn't because she suddenly remembered she had a daughter. Some memories never leave you, no matter how many years pass. Mine begins with a suitcase. I was 12 years old. The suitcase stood beside our front door. At first, I thought someone was going on a trip. Then I realized every piece of clothing inside belonged to me. The smell of dinner drifted through the kitchen. Hot roast, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal my mother only made on Sundays. But no one was eating. She sat across from me with a careful expression, almost rehearsed. "Charlotte," she said softly, "you're going to stay with Uncle Raymond for a little while." A little while. Those 3 words became the lie that shaped my childhood. I remember asking how long. My father never even looked up from his newspaper. "We'll see." That was all he said. No explanation. No comfort. Nothing. Upstairs, my twin sister Whitney was practicing piano with her private tutor. She'd recently won a statewide science competition. Everyone celebrated her. She had new books, private lessons, special classes, every opportunity money could buy. I wasn't jealous. I simply noticed that none of those things were ever meant for me. I wasn't a troublemaker. I got decent grades. I loved animals more than anything. I tried hard. But I wasn't extraordinary. And in our house, being ordinary meant becoming invisible. Around 7 that evening, my Uncle Raymond's pickup truck rolled into the driveway. My mother walked me outside carrying my suitcase. She kissed the top of my head. "Be good." That was it. No promises. No tears. "No, we'll miss you." She turned around before Raymond's truck had even backed out of the driveway. As we drove away, I looked through the kitchen window. I watched my mother clear the dinner table. She scraped leftovers into the trash, washed the dishes, continued her evening, as if I had never existed. I kept waiting for her to run outside, to stop the truck, to change her mind. She never did. That little while became the rest of my childhood. And somewhere during that drive, without realizing it, I stopped believing I was coming home. The first night at Uncle Raymond's farmhouse felt like I had been dropped into a stranger's life. Everything was unfamiliar. The old wooden floors creaked with every step. The house smelled of fresh bread, coffee, and hay instead of expensive candles and polished furniture. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, convinced my parents would call the next morning and ask Raymond to bring me home. They never did. Raymond wasn't a man who believed in long speeches. He wasn't cold. He simply showed love through actions instead of words. His wife, Diane, was different. She welcomed me without asking questions. She never treated me like a guest. Every evening she placed 3 plates on the dinner table as though I had always belonged there. Not once did she ask why my parents had sent me away. Not once did she make me feel like I had to explain myself. For the first time in months, I wasn't being judged. A few days later, before sunrise, someone knocked gently on my bedroom door. "Charlotte," Raymond called. "If you want to sleep, go back to sleep. But if you want to learn something, a cow needs help." I pulled on my boots without thinking. Outside, the air was freezing. The stars still filled the sky. Inside the barn, one of the cows was struggling to deliver her calf. Raymond handed me a flashlight. "Just hold the light." Nothing more. For nearly an hour, I watched him work. He never raised his voice. Never panicked. He spoke calmly to the frightened animal, as though she understood every word. Finally, a tiny calf slid onto the straw. A few seconds later, it lifted its head. Then it tried to stand. I had never witnessed anything so beautiful. Something inside me changed that morning. For the first time since leaving home, I felt hope. Life on the farm wasn't easy. There were chores before school, chores after school. Weekends weren't vacations. They were simply longer workdays. But every task taught me something. I learned responsibility, patience, kindness. Animals didn't care whether you were the smartest kid in class. They didn't care if you came from a wealthy family. They only cared whether you showed up, whether you were gentle, whether they could trust you. That made perfect sense to me. As the months passed, the nightmares slowly disappeared. I stopped expecting my parents to come back. Deep down, I finally understood they weren't coming. One evening, while feeding chickens, I asked Raymond a question I'd been carrying for months. "Did my parents tell you why they sent me here?" He looked across the pasture before answering. "They said you needed a different environment." Even at 12. I knew that wasn't the whole truth, but I also knew Raymond wasn't the type to speak badly about family. He simply let me discover people for myself. Diane became the closest thing I had to a mother. She celebrated every good grade. She baked my favorite pie on birthdays. She stayed awake when I was sick. And every single night, before turning off the kitchen lights, she asked the same question. "Did you eat enough today?" No one had ever asked me that before. It sounds small, but when you've spent years feeling invisible, simple kindness feels enormous. By the time I turned 14, I could handle most farm work on my own. Raymond trusted me with newborn calves, injured horses, even difficult births. He never treated me like a child. He treated me like someone capable. That confidence changed everything. One afternoon, he looked at me while we were repairing a fence. "You've got good hands." I laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means animals relax around you. You should think about becoming a veterinarian." The idea hit me like lightning. No one had ever asked what I wanted to become. No one had ever suggested I had a future worth chasing. From that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted. Getting into veterinary school became my entire world. I studied constantly, worked every spare hour on the farm, applied for scholarships, took extra classes. Not because anyone forced me, because I finally had something worth fighting for. Meanwhile, I heard almost nothing from my parents. No birthday calls, no Christmas invitations, nothing. Except 3 or 4 times a year, an envelope arrived, always addressed in beautiful old-fashioned handwriting, always from my grandmother, Eleanor. Inside was a birthday card, sometimes a $10 bill, and a short handwritten note. The message always ended exactly the same way. "Thinking of you always. Love, Grandma." Those cards became my lifeline. She never criticized my parents. She never explained why everything had happened. Instead, she asked about school, about the horses, about Raymond and Diane. She remembered every little detail. When I wrote back describing a rescued foal, her next letter asked whether the foal had recovered. When I mentioned wanting to become a veterinarian, she replied with only one sentence: "I always knew you would care for those who couldn't speak." I kept every single one of those letters. I still have them today. Years passed. High school became college. After graduating from veterinary school, I didn't move to a big city where the salaries were higher or the clinics were larger. I came back to the only place that had ever truly felt like home: Marrow Creek. It wasn't because the town offered more opportunities. It was because it offered something I had spent my entire childhood searching for: belonging. I started working alongside the town's aging veterinarian, Dr. Porter. For years, he had treated nearly every farm animal within 50 miles. When he finally decided to retire, he offered me the chance to buy his practice. It wasn't easy. I signed papers that buried me under student loans and business debt. Most people would have called it a terrible financial decision. I called it the beginning of my life. A year later, I met Sam. Oddly enough, it happened in the parking lot of a farm supply store. His truck refused to start. Mine happened to have jumper cables. That was our introduction. No dramatic romance. No movie moment. Just two tired adults standing beside broken trucks on a freezing afternoon. Sometimes that's enough. Sam understood hard work because he'd lived it. He never cared where I came from. He never asked why my parents were missing from family photographs. He simply accepted me exactly as I was. For someone like me, that felt extraordinary. We married on Raymond's farm beneath a huge oak tree overlooking the pasture, where I had once helped deliver my very first calf. It wasn't an expensive wedding. There were folding chairs, homemade food, wildflowers picked by neighbors. Raymond walked me down the aisle, not because he had replaced my father, but because he had earned the place my father abandoned. Diane smiled through tears the entire ceremony. Only 3 months later, cancer took her away. Losing Diane felt like losing my mother all over again. Except this time, someone who truly loved me was gone. Life continued. It always does. Soon our daughter Mia arrived. Then came Eli. The house filled with laughter, with toys scattered across the floor, with muddy boots lined up beside the door, with bedtime stories, birthday cakes, school projects, the ordinary moments that quietly become life's greatest treasures. Looking around our little home, I often realized something. Everything my parents believed I would never build was standing right in front of me. A career, a marriage, Children who knew they were loved. A family that never kept score. Throughout those years, Grandma Eleanor never stopped writing. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone, another card arrived. She knew about Sam. She knew our children's names. She asked about my patients. Sometimes she enclosed $20 for ice cream with the kids. Other times it was simply another handwritten letter reminding me that someone, somewhere was proud of me. One Christmas she wrote something that stayed with me forever. You built the life they never believed you could. At the time, I smiled and placed the card inside the same wooden box where I kept all the others. I didn't realize those words carried a much deeper meaning. Then one February morning, everything changed. I was finishing paperwork at the clinic when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Diane's old number. For one impossible second, my heart forgot Diane had been gone for years. Then I remembered. Someone else must have been using the number now. I answered. A gentle voice introduced herself as a nurse from the assisted living center where Grandma Eleanor had been staying. I'm sorry to call like this, she said quietly. But your grandmother suffered a stroke early this morning. My stomach tightened. Is she okay? There was a pause. She is asking for you. You should come as soon as you can. I left everything exactly where it was. The paperwork, my coffee, even my jacket. I simply grabbed my keys and drove. The roads were covered with fresh snow. Every red light felt unbearable. I kept telling myself I'd make it in time. I had to. When I walked into Eleanor's room, she looked so much smaller than I remembered. The stroke had weakened one side of her face. Speaking was difficult. But the moment she saw me, her eyes lit up. She reached for my hand. I took it immediately. Charlie. She always called me Charlie. No one else ever did. Hearing that nickname nearly broke me. I smiled through tears. I'm here, Grandma. You don't have to talk. You just rest. She squeezed my fingers surprisingly hard. No. I need... She struggled for every word. The box. I leaned closer. What box? The wooden box. At my house. You open it. Only you. I frowned. What do you mean? She shook her head weakly. There are things you need when I'm gone. Then she whispered something that Grandma Eleanor's funeral was exactly the kind she would have wanted. Simple. Quiet. No grand speeches. No expensive flowers. Just a handful of people who had genuinely loved her. Raymond stood beside me throughout the service, his weathered hands folded tightly in front of him. Sam kept one arm around my shoulders. A few neighbors from Merrow Creek came to pay their respects. Several nurses from the care home attended as well. But there were 3 people I kept looking for. My mother. My father. Whitney. None of them came. Not one of them made the 3-hour drive to say goodbye to the woman who had spent her entire life loving them. I wish I could say I was shocked. I wasn't. Some disappointments stop hurting after enough years. They simply become expected. What had surprised me was Aunt Pam. She appeared halfway through the reception, wearing an expensive black coat and carrying a face full of carefully rehearsed sympathy. Within minutes, she found me standing alone near the coffee table. Oh, sweetheart, she sighed dramatically. Eleanor was such a wonderful woman. I thanked her politely. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. So, did she leave everything organized? I looked at her. I'm sorry? You know, her house, her savings, the estate. I assume someone is handling all of that? There it was. Not grief. Not love. Money. Grandma hadn't even been buried yet. And someone was already asking about her belongings. I simply answered, her attorney is taking care of everything. The word attorney immediately changed Aunt Pam's expression. She smiled again. A little too quickly. Well, I'm sure everything will be divided fairly. She squeezed my arm before walking away to make a phone call. Watching her disappear into the parking lot, I realized something. Someone had sent her. 2 days later, I met Grandma Eleanor's attorney. Her name was Marisol Vance. She had practiced law in our county for years. Her office sat above an old hardware store downtown. It wasn't impressive, but the woman behind the desk radiated confidence. She welcomed me inside without unnecessary small talk. Charlotte, she said gently, your grandmother planned for this day a long time ago. She placed a thick folder on the desk. Then another. Then finally, a small wooden box. My heart skipped. The box. The same one Grandma had whispered about. Before opening anything, Marisol looked directly at me. I want you to understand something. None of this happened recently. Your grandmother made these decisions years ago. She opened the folder. The documents inside completely changed my life. Grandma Eleanor had left almost everything. To me. Her house. Her savings. Several investment accounts. Even a piece of farmland she had quietly owned for years. The total value was far greater than I had ever imagined. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough to erase every debt Sam and I carried. Enough to send both our children to college. Enough to change generations of our family. I couldn't speak. Marisol wasn't finished. She handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandma Eleanor's familiar handwriting. Beside it sat the wooden box. Eleanor gave very specific instructions. The letter. The box. You must open both of them alone. No one else. Then she paused. There's something else you should know. She adjusted her glasses. Your grandmother included what's called a no-contest clause. I frowned. What does that mean? If anyone challenges her will in court and loses, they receive absolutely nothing. I blinked. So she expected someone to contest it? Marisol gave a slow nod. She expected it enough to prepare for it. I carried everything home that afternoon. The wooden box sat on the passenger seat beside me. The sealed letter rested on top. I kept glancing at them during the drive. I wanted to open both immediately, but something told me to wait until I was home. Alone. I had barely stepped inside the house when my phone rang. The same Iowa number. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. My mother's voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Charlotte, I'm so glad you picked up. I've been thinking about you constantly." I didn't answer. She continued anyway. "Your grandmother's passing made your father and me realize how precious family really is. We've made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. But you're still our daughter." We'd really like to put the past behind us. I listened quietly. Then she said exactly what I had been expecting. "We're planning a family dinner. Everyone will be there. You, Whitney, the aunts, the cousins. It'll be a fresh start." Her words sounded warm, almost loving. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed them. But timing matters. For 22 years. Silence. No birthday cards. No phone calls. No apologies. Then suddenly, only days after Grandma Eleanor died, they wanted reconciliation. No, they wanted something else. I asked calmly, "What changed?" There was a brief silence. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, honey, we're all getting older, and family should help family." There it was. Help. That single word revealed everything. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about rebuilding a relationship. It was about getting something from me. I told her I'd think about the invitation. Before hanging up, she said, "I love you." It was the first time she'd spoken those words to me in over 2 decades. Instead of warming my heart, they landed like empty lines from a script. That evening, I stood alone in my kitchen. The wooden box remained unopened on the table. So did Grandma Eleanor's letter. Somehow, I already knew. Whatever answers I'd been searching for my entire life were waiting inside. That night, after Sam had put the kids to bed, I finally sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was completely quiet. Only the ticking clock on the wall broke the silence. In front of me sat Grandma Eleanor's wooden box. Beside it rested the sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her familiar handwriting. For several minutes, I simply stared at them. A strange feeling settled over me, almost as if opening them meant there was no turning back. Eventually, I took a deep breath and carefully broke the seal on the letter. The handwriting was shaky, far weaker than the beautiful script I remembered from years before. But it was unmistakably hers. It began simply, "My dear Charlie." Tears immediately filled my eyes. No one had called me Charlie since she died. I continued reading. If you're reading this, it means I'm finally gone. There are things I should have told you years ago. Instead, I stayed quiet because I believed your parents would eventually do the right thing. That was the greatest mistake of my life. I stopped reading. My hands were already trembling. The letter continued. Grandma admitted she had watched my parents slowly push me aside while giving Whitney every opportunity. She confessed that she had argued with them more than once. She had begged them to treat us equally. But nothing ever changed. Instead, things became worse. Then came the sentence that completely changed everything. I couldn't stop them from choosing between my granddaughters, but I could make sure the truth survived. My heart started racing. Grandma explained that she had spent years quietly collecting documents, bank records, letters, legal papers, copies of financial statements. She kept everything inside the wooden box. Not because she wanted revenge, because she wanted me to know I had never imagined what happened. She wanted proof. When I finished the letter, I carefully folded it exactly the way she always folded her own letters. Then I reached for the wooden box. The lid opened with a soft creak. The first thing inside surprised me. Photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of Whitney and me as little girls wearing matching dresses. Birthday parties. School plays. Christmas mornings. There were even photos Raymond and Diane had secretly mailed Grandma over the years. She had quietly documented my entire life, even after everyone else pretended I no longer existed. I smiled through tears as I looked through them one by one. Then I reached the bottom layer. Everything changed. There were folders, legal documents, bank statements, account records. Every page was neatly labeled in Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. One folder immediately caught my attention. Education fund. I frowned. Education fund? I opened it. Inside were statements dating back nearly 25 years. At first, they looked ordinary. Monthly deposits. Interest earned. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed something. The account listed two beneficiaries. Whitney Ingram. Charlotte Ingram. My name. Our names. Both of us. I kept reading. The account had been created shortly after we were born. Grandma Eleanor had contributed every year. So had several relatives. Even a great-aunt had left money specifically for our education. Everything had been divided equally. Every single dollar! Until the year I moved to Raymond's farm. The deposits continued. But suddenly, the withdrawals began. Large withdrawals. Private tutoring. Private school tuition. Music lessons. College payments. Every withdrawal benefited only one person. Whitney. I checked the next statement. Then the next. Then another. The pattern never changed. My entire half of the account slowly disappeared, dollar by dollar, until nothing remained. I sat frozen, unable to breathe. There had always been money for my education, enough to help pay for veterinary school, enough to prevent years of crushing debt, enough to completely change my future. But instead, my parents had spent my share funding Whitney's life. I wasn't simply ignored. I had been erased financially. For years, I blamed myself for struggling. I remembered surviving on instant noodles in college, working overnight shifts, taking every scholarship available, borrowing money, skipping meals, wondering whether I'd ever escape debt. All that time, money with my name attached had already existed. My parents had simply decided I wasn't worth spending it on. The realization hurt far more than being sent away. Because this wasn't neglect. It was a decision. Repeated. Planned. Documented. I didn't cry. Not immediately. Instead, I organized every paper into neat stacks. Raymond had taught me something years earlier. When life becomes overwhelming, don't panic. Handle one problem at a time. So that's exactly what I did. Dates, statements, withdrawals, copies, everything in perfect order. By midnight, I had created my own file. The next morning, I drove straight to Marisol's office. She carefully examined every document. The longer she read, the more serious her expression became. Finally, she removed her glasses. Charlotte, I've handled inheritance cases for 30 years. I've seen families argue over money. I've seen siblings stop speaking. But this... She tapped the bank statements. This is different. I waited. She continued. If these records are accurate, your parents didn't simply favor one child. They transferred money belonging to one named beneficiary into the benefit of another. I frowned. What does that mean? It means this may not just be morally wrong. It could also carry legal consequences. The room fell silent. I looked down at the documents. I don't want revenge, I admitted quietly. I just wanted the truth. Marisol nodded. I believe you. Which is exactly why these documents matter. She leaned forward. Charlotte, you came in here believing your grandmother left you a shield. She rested one hand on the stack of papers. What she actually left you was evidence. Just as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. Another message from my mother. Saturday, 6 o'clock, Hollowbrook Restaurant. Everyone is excited to see you. Let's finally become a family again. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the folder in my hands. Slowly, a plan began forming. If they wanted a family dinner, I'd be there. But this time, I wouldn't arrive as the forgotten daughter. I'd arrive with the truth. For 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had discovered. Every document I had read. Every sentence Grandma Eleanor had written. Every bank statement. None of it felt real. I had spent most of my life believing I simply hadn't been worth the effort. Now I knew something even worse. Someone had made that decision for me. On Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. The message was short. "Hi, Charlotte, it's Whitney. I know this is unexpected, but could we meet? Just us, please." I stared at the screen for several minutes. The last real conversation we'd ever had happened when we were 12 years old. After that, nothing. 22 years of silence. Every instinct told me not to reply. But another part of me, the little girl who had once shared a bedroom with her twin, wanted answers. I finally responded with one sentence. "Tomorrow, noon, Maple Street Cafe." The cafe sat halfway between our towns. Neutral ground. When I walked inside, I almost didn't recognize her. Whitney looked exhausted. Her shoulders slumped. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. The confidence I remembered from childhood had disappeared. She smiled nervously as I approached. "Hi, Charlie." She stopped. "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should call you that." I smiled faintly. "Only Grandma called me Charlie." Whitney looked down. "I know." For a few awkward minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, work, the long drive. Neither of us knew how to begin discussing 22 lost years. Finally, Whitney took a deep breath. "I owe you an explanation." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "My company failed. I lost almost everything. I divorced 6 months later. And now," she laughed bitterly, "I'm 34 years old and living in Mom and Dad's basement." There wasn't any self-pity in her voice, only exhaustion. For the first time, I didn't see the golden child. I saw another person who had been carrying pain. Then she looked directly at me. "I've thought about you for years." I remained silent. "I always wondered why you never came home." My stomach tightened. Whitney continued quietly. "When we were kids, I asked Mom where you'd gone. She told me." For 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had discovered. Every document I had read. Every sentence Grandma Eleanor had written. Every bank statement. None of it felt real. I had spent most of my life believing I simply hadn't been worth the effort. Now I knew something even worse. Someone had made that decision for me. On Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. The message was short. "Hi, Charlotte. It's Whitney. I know this is unexpected, but could we meet? Just us, please." I stared at the screen for several minutes. The last real conversation we'd ever had happened when we were 12 years old. After that, nothing. 22 years of silence. Every instinct told me not to reply. But another part of me, the little girl who had once shared a bedroom with her twin, wanted answers. I finally responded with one sentence. "Tomorrow, noon, Maple Street Cafe." The cafe sat halfway between our towns. Neutral ground. When I walked inside, I almost didn't recognize her. Whitney looked exhausted. Her shoulders slumped. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. The confidence I remembered from childhood had disappeared. She smiled nervously as I approached. "Hi, Charlie." She stopped. "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should call you that." I smiled faintly. "Only Grandma called me Charlie." Whitney looked down. "I know." For a few awkward minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, work, the long drive. Neither of us knew how to begin discussing 22 lost years. Finally, Whitney took a deep breath. "I owe you an explanation." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "My company failed. I lost almost everything. I divorced 6 months later. And now," she laughed bitterly, "I'm 34 years old and living in Mom and Dad's basement." There wasn't any self-pity in her voice, only exhaustion. For the first time, I didn't see the golden child. I saw another person who had been carrying pain. Then she looked directly at me. "I've thought about you for years." I remained silent. "I always wondered why you never came home." My stomach tightened. Whitney continued quietly. "When we were kids, I asked Mom where you'd gone. She told me." My hand slowly tightened around my mug. "That you chose Uncle Raymond. She said you didn't want to live with us anymore. She told me you were happier without this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Whitney, I never chose anything." "I was 12. They packed my suitcase. They told me I was leaving." Her face went completely pale. "No," she whispered. "No." "That's impossible." I shook my head. "It's true. They signed guardianship papers. I never had a choice." Whitney looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. She stared into space for nearly a full minute. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. "I believed them," she whispered. "For 22 years. I believed you abandoned me." Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. Two children had grown into adults carrying opposite versions of the same lie. Finally, Whitney asked quietly, "Do you hate me?" I answered honestly, "No. I hate what happened. But you were 12 too." She nodded slowly. "I wish I'd known." "So do I." When we stood to leave, Whitney stopped me. "I don't know what's happening with Mom and Dad, but something feels wrong. They're desperate. They keep talking about Grandma's will. They keep saying everyone needs to stick together Saturday. Saturday. The family dinner." I thanked her, then drove home thinking harder than ever. The following morning, Marisol called. "I found something." Her voice sounded unusually serious. "You should come in." Half an hour later, I sat across from her desk. She slid one document toward me. "I requested your guardianship records." I looked down. The paper was over 20 years old. Notarized. Official. Signed by both my parents. Marisol pointed toward one section. Read the reason. My eyes moved across the page. Parents unable to provide adequate resources for both children. I read it again. Then again. There it was. In my father's own handwriting. The sentence that explained my entire childhood. They hadn't claimed abuse. They hadn't claimed I needed special care. They hadn't claimed an emergency. They had simply admitted they chose one child over the other. Legally. Officially. In writing. I looked at Marisol. My mother told Whitney I chose to leave. I know. Marisol answered quietly. That document destroys that lie. I nodded slowly. So now I have proof. You do? She leaned back. And your parents have no idea. Over the next 2 days, I prepared carefully. I wasn't planning an argument. I wasn't planning revenge. I wanted something much simpler. The truth. I bought a heavy black folder. Inside it, I organized every document in order. The guardianship papers. The education fund records. Certified bank statements. Copies of Grandma Eleanor's letter. Everything. Simple. Professional. Impossible to deny. Sam watched me working late one evening. You've checked that folder 10 times. I know. He smiled gently. Are you nervous? I laughed softly. Terrified. He walked around the table and wrapped his arms around me. You don't have to prove anything. I know. But I need to finish this. He kissed my forehead. Whatever happens Saturday. You already won. I looked at him. How? He smiled. Because you built a family that loves you. They never took that away. The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying childhood memories. The suitcase. The truck. The kitchen window. Then I remembered something Raymond once told me during a difficult calving. When the time comes, don't pull too early. Wait. The right moment always arrives. Saturday was that moment. 22 years of silence were about to end. Saturday evening arrived far sooner than I wanted. I spent the morning exactly the way I spent every other Saturday. Working. A farmer called about a horse with a deep cut along its front leg. Another needed help with a difficult calf delivery. One family brought in an old sheepdog that had stopped eating. Animals don't care about family drama. They simply need someone willing to help. In a strange way, that steadied me. By the time I drove home, my nerves had settled. Whatever happened that night, I was ready. Before leaving, I laid everything across the kitchen table one final time. The guardianship agreement, the bank records, the certified statements, Grandma Eleanor's letter. Every document sat neatly inside a black folder. No dramatic speeches. No tricks. Only facts. Sam watched quietly from across the room. You've checked those papers at least 20 times. I know. You afraid you'll forget something? I smiled. No. I'm afraid they'll finally hear everything. He walked over and squeezed my hand. They'll hear it. And whether they accept it, that's no longer your responsibility. Just before I left, Mia wrapped her tiny arms around my waist. Mom? Will your mommy be nice today? Children ask the hardest questions. I knelt beside her. I honestly don't know. She hugged me tighter. You be brave. Those 3 little words stayed with me the entire drive. The restaurant sat only 10 minutes away. As I pulled into the parking lot, my phone vibrated. A new notification appeared. It came from the family group chat my mother had recently added me to. Curious, I opened it. Then I froze. The message had obviously been sent to the wrong conversation. Instead of going privately to my father, it had gone to every relative attending dinner. It read, "Once Charlotte signs Grandma Eleanor's inheritance over to Whitney tonight, this whole mess will finally be over. Don't let her leave without signing. Be warm, but don't give in." I read it twice. My heart became perfectly calm. There it was, in my mother's own words. The entire purpose of tonight. Not reconciliation. Not forgiveness. A transaction. Before I could react, the message disappeared. Seconds later, another appeared. Oops, wrong conversation. Too late. I had already taken a screenshot, and so had everyone else. For the first time, I smiled. I picked up my folder, locked the truck, walked through the restaurant doors. The hostess led me into a private dining room. Every seat was occupied. Conversations immediately stopped. My mother stood first. Her smile was bright enough to fool anyone who didn't know her. Charlotte! I'm so happy you're here. She hugged me tightly. I didn't hug her back. I simply allowed it to happen. Across the room, Whitney gave me a nervous glance. She looked frightened. Aunt Pam sat beside my mother wearing the confident smile of someone certain the evening would go exactly as planned. My father nodded once. Nothing more. I took my seat, placed the black folder beside my chair, and waited. Dinner began. For nearly an hour, everyone avoided uncomfortable subjects. They discussed weather. Politics. Children. Old family vacations. My mother laughed louder than anyone else. She wanted the room relaxed before making her move. Eventually, she placed her napkin on the table, smiled around the room, then looked directly at me. Family has been through difficult times. She sighed dramatically. But tonight, we finally have a chance to heal. Several relatives nodded. My mother continued. Whitney has suffered so much recently. The divorce, the business, the financial struggles. She reached over and gently touched my hand. Fortunately, some of us have been blessed. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. Then she unfolded several sheets of paper. A pen rested neatly on top. I've prepared a simple agreement. If you voluntarily share Grandma Eleanor's estate, we can finally move forward as one family. Silence. Every eye turned toward me. This was the moment they had planned for. Pressure. Guilt. An audience. Exactly as Marisol predicted. I looked calmly at the document, then back at my mother. Before we talk about Grandma's will, I have one question. She smiled confidently. Of course. Why have you spent 22 years telling everyone I chose to leave? The smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then it returned. Because that's what happened, sweetheart. You wanted to live with Raymond. You never wanted to come home. Several relatives nodded. Aunt Pam quickly added, Everyone knows that. My father remained silent. Watching. Waiting. I reached beside my chair, lifted the black folder, placed it carefully beside my mother's wine glass, exactly where she couldn't ignore it. The room became perfectly quiet. I think, I said softly, everyone deserves to hear the truth. I opened the folder, removed the first document. This is the legal guardianship agreement signed by both my parents when I was 12. I slid it into the center of the table. It says I didn't choose to leave. It says my parents voluntarily transferred custody to Uncle Raymond. Several relatives leaned forward, confused. I continued. Please read the reason. No one spoke. Finally, one uncle picked up the document. His eyes widened. Slowly, he read the sentence aloud. Parents unable to provide adequate resources for both children. No one moved. No one breathed. I looked at my mother. I never abandoned this family. I was given away. My mother immediately shook her head. That's being taken completely out of context. We were struggling financially. We did what we had to do. Before she could continue, I removed a second group of documents. The education fund. I spread the statements across the table. This account belonged to Whitney and me. It was created for both daughters. I pointed toward the highlighted withdrawals. My share disappeared. Every dollar. It paid for Whitney's education. My college money was spent on someone else. A shocked silence filled the room. Whitney stared at the papers. She had never seen them before. Then something happened I will never forget. My father spoke. Not defensively. Not apologetically. Matter-of-factly. We invested where it made the most sense. The room turned toward him. He continued. You can't divide limited resources equally. Sometimes one child has greater potential. You invest where you'll get the best result. The words echoed through the dining room. No one interrupted him, because everyone had just heard the truth. Straight from him. He didn't even realize what he had admitted. Aunt Pam jumped in desperately. This is ridiculous. Charlotte came here to embarrass everyone. She's manipulating all of you. I quietly unlocked my phone. I'd like everyone to see something else. I opened the screenshot, then read my mother's accidental message aloud. Once Charlotte signs Grandma Eleanor's inheritance over to Whitney tonight, don't let her leave without signing. I slowly turned my phone so everyone could read it themselves. One cousin looked at another. An aunt covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The room changed completely. Every carefully built lie collapsed in seconds. At the far end of the table, Whitney slowly stood. Tears streamed down her face. She looked first at me, then at our parents. I asked about Charlotte. When we were 12, I asked why she never came home. She looked directly at our mother. "You told me she abandoned us. You made me believe my own sister stopped loving me." Her voice broke. "But she never left. You made her leave." The room was absolutely silent. My mother finally lost control. Everything she had carefully rehearsed disappeared. She slammed both hands onto the table. "I sacrificed everything. I gave up my career. I gave up my dreams. I did what I had to do. No one appreciates what I gave up." She was shouting now. Every relative watched in stunned silence. For 22 years, she had carefully managed her image. Tonight, everyone finally saw the woman behind it. I quietly gathered my papers, placed them back inside the folder, then looked around the table one last time. I'm not signing anything. My grandmother made her decision. I intend to honor it. I looked toward my father. As for everything else, my attorney already has copies. If you wish to continue this, you can speak with her. Then I turned toward everyone else. I don't blame those of you who believed their story. You were told the same lie. But now, you've seen the truth yourselves. I closed the folder, picked it up, then looked at Whitney. When you're ready to build your own life, call me as my sister. Not because of money, because I'd like to know you. Whitney nodded through tears. I will. Without another word, I walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. The performance was over. And for the first time in 22 years, the truth had finally spoken louder than the lie. Was Sam. How are you doing? He asked softly. I looked up at the dark sky. I think. I smiled. I finally came home. He didn't ask what happened inside the restaurant. He simply replied, We're waiting for you. Those 4 words meant more than anything my parents had ever said. The next morning, my attorney called. Marisol had already received 3 voicemail messages from my father's lawyer, then another from my aunt, then one from a financial advisor hired by my parents. Every conversation had the same purpose. They wanted to negotiate. Not apologize. Negotiate. Marisol laughed quietly. They've realized the evidence is stronger than they expected. What should I tell them? I didn't need time to think. Tell them my answer is no. And if they challenge Grandma's will, they're welcome to try. Marisol smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 weeks later, my parents officially filed paperwork contesting Grandma Eleanor's estate. Exactly as Grandma had predicted. The hearing lasted less than a single afternoon. The judge reviewed the will, reviewed the no contest clause, reviewed the supporting documents, then issued a decision. The challenge failed. Immediately. Because of the clause Grandma had included years earlier. My parents didn't receive a smaller share. They received nothing. Not $1. Exactly as she intended. When the hearing ended, my father walked past me without speaking. My mother stopped several feet away. For a moment, I almost believed she might finally apologize. Instead, she asked, "Was it worth destroying this family?" I looked at her quietly, then answered, "I didn't destroy it. I only stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." She stared at me for several seconds, then turned and walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. Whitney called 2 months later, not to ask for money, not to discuss the inheritance. She simply wanted coffee. We talked for nearly 4 hours. About childhood, about Grandma, about the lies we'd both believed. She apologized for things that had never been her fault. I apologized for disappearing, even though I hadn't chosen to. Some wounds never disappear completely, but they can heal enough to stop controlling your life. Over the next year, Whitney rebuilt everything from the beginning. She found a new job, moved into a small apartment, started therapy. For the first time in her life, she made decisions without asking our parents for permission. Slowly, she became someone I could genuinely call my sister. Not because we shared blood, because we finally shared honesty. One Saturday afternoon, she visited our farm. Mia immediately grabbed her hand and insisted on introducing every chicken by name. Eli proudly showed her a turtle he'd rescued from the road. Whitney laughed harder than I'd ever heard. Watching her with my children, I realized something. They weren't inheriting the family I grew up in. They were inheriting the family we chose to build. And that made all the difference. Several months later, Sam and I used part of Grandma Eleanor's inheritance to pay off every remaining loan. The mortgage, the veterinary clinic, the student debt that had followed me for years. For the first time since graduating, everything belonged to us, debt-free. But the greatest gift wasn't financial freedom. It was peace. We also established something new, the Eleanor Grant Fund. Every year, it provides scholarships for students from farming communities who dream of becoming veterinarians but can't afford the education. The very opportunity I almost lost now belongs to someone else every single year. I think Grandma would have liked that. One evening, after closing the clinic, I unlocked the small cabinet in my office. Inside sat the wooden box. Grandma's letters. The photographs. Every document. I rarely open it now. I don't need to. Its purpose was never to remind me of betrayal. Its purpose was to remind me that the truth survives, even when people spend decades trying to bury it. Sometimes people ask whether I regret confronting my parents. My answer always surprises them. No, because confrontation wasn't the goal. Freedom was. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. Healing doesn't require pretending abuse never happened. And love, real love, never asks one child to disappear so another can shine. If there's one lesson my life has taught me, it's this. The family you're born into shapes your beginning. The family you build shapes your future. Your past may explain your scars, but it never gets to decide your worth. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's finally learning the truth and having the courage to live without fear. The end.